This is an interview with Will and Inez Christen for the Valley Historical Project. The interviewer is myself, Margaret Foxwell, assisted by my husband Tom. The date is November 26th and
No, not quite.
24th, and we are in the Christian home. This is 1998. We want to thank you, Inez and Bill, for granting us an interview, and the material will be used to further interpret the heritage of this region. It will be primarily used for educational purposes and may help in promoting economic development and tourism. Now, the first thing we want to know is some basic information. Inez, I understand this Thanksgiving is your birthday.
This year,
Uh,
the 26th.
Can you talk real loud for us?
The 26th. It's on Thanksgiving this year.
All right. When were you born?
1906,
1906. And where?
near Randalia.
Your family lived out there how long?
I suppose 4 years,
And then they moved
near Fayette,
near Fayette.
and many years I lived between Volga and Wadena.
That's where I think of you as being from, West Volga.
Volga.
Did you go to school there?
Beg pardon?
Did you go to school in Volga?
Yes.
Well, we took country school next door, and then you had some high school, didn't you?
Yes, I did have some high school.
Where were your parents born, Inez?
Mama was born in Switzerland, and Dad was over by Randalia.
Was he from, what was his nationality? Do you know?
No.
Mixture.
Yes,
Some things go back to the Revolution.
Yeah. Goes back to German ancestry, maybe?
Well, somebody had it that the original one was one of the hired Germans that were fighting for England at the Revolution.
Mm-hmm. That goes,
Hessians, yeah.
Hessian soldier. That goes back quite a ways then, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Did your mother immigrate here? Or was she
she
born
was
here?
a 5-month-old baby when they started out
She was.
from Switzerland.
How'd they come? Did you know the story?
No? Oh, yes. They had a potato famine over there, and many people left because they just... Potatoes was the main crop, and they had to live.
How long were they in coming? Do you know?
No.
No. It would be nice to know when...
Well,
we'll come to you now. When was your birthday? Well, when were you born? And what's your full name?
Well, Jacob Christen was born 22nd of July in 12,
And where?
1912.
1912. Where?
Well, east of Elgin.
East of Elgin. Is that what you call the Christian Brothers place?
Jake Christen place.
And
Lucy's.
The Christen brothers was their other family, and we,
the home place.
yeah.
Were your parents born there?
No, they were both born in Switzerland. Dad came across, he was 18 when he came across in 98, and Mother came across in 1900. I think she was about 20 at the time. She had worked at the Paris World's Fair that summer.
She had.
Came on there.
They must have had quite a trip. Did you ever hear about the trip over?
Well, I never heard anything about hers. I don't know if it's that time, I think it was. Dad said they were held up in London for 8 days on account of fog. And he never said it, but somebody else said that every able-bodied person on board had to carry water all the while to keep the ship from sinking. They're in the water 3 weeks.
Goodness. Were they together? The families
No,
together?
no. There was about granddad and step-grandmother and two of Dad's brothers and sister, and about 4 or 5 step-brothers and step-sisters came across at that time.
Well, that was quite a group.
Well, yeah,
Been a boatload of Christens.
and altogether there was 23 in that family, so,
And they all came, most of them came together then.
well, no, there's some that died before they came, and one stayed there a few years after, and the rest were born here.
Uh-huh. Well, that's an interesting story.
Lots of girls.
A lot of hardships
And,
there, weren't
At
there?
one time they lost 5 with scarlet fever in one shot.
Here or in
Yeah, here, yeah.
Switzerland? Yeah, well, that was
So-
quite a terrible loss. Do you have any more that you could tell us about their immigration?
Not offhand, I might if I had a half a day to take, yeah.
Yeah.
But the old home
Picture.
was where the newcomers came and stayed when they came across, and then they would get their footing, you might say, find work or something, and then go out, but they always came back to the old Christian home. You see, that was where they landed, so to speak, and there was many people that came.
Was that a big house?
Well, it was a Bracker place at the time when the Christians came over, and then somewhere in there, they were there 3 years, and then bought where I was born, half a mile away, and somewhere in the process, that Bracker house burned down and rebuilt, and the Christians bought that place in 1900. And then bought more land to go with it later. But it should take care of the big part of that story. But as Mom said, there's several different ones came after and made that headquarters, yeah.
If houses could talk.
Yeah.
Where was the Bracker place, Bill? Where was the Bracker place?
Well, that's a half mile around the bend of the road, yeah.
Not where the Christian Brothers was.
Yeah, and that Christians bought it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Show that picture you want, Margaret?
What?
You want to show that picture? Put that closer. See how it looks. There. There. Now that's the picture. Okay. Now,
This is Bill's family, his mother, and can you name name them, Bill?
Well, there it's on the back, you can
Oh.
read it off.
Too late now. Inez, where did you go to school then?
The whole grades was right next door to my old home.
A country school?
Yes. Then I went to Volga 2 full years. Education wasn't so important then.
Can get a pretty good education just living that many years, can't you?
Yes.
Bill, I'd be interested in, I know where your old school was, but how far was it from home, from where you lived?
Well, figuring all the curves and dips and everything, it'd have been a good mile and a half. 2 creeks and 8 to 10 fences.
Did you walk through the woods or the road?
I never had a ride to or from school.
Did you walk
We walked around whichever.
Oh, my.
around the road or
No,
through
no,
the
no,
woods?
5-6 miles if we went around the road, so just cross country,
It was.
across the fences and creeks and whatever happened to be in the way.
Was it a big, did you have a lot of pupils?
Well, when I started, according to the record book that we have here, there was 29 that first year.
One teacher?
One teacher. Some of the older girls helped out sometimes and held classes and such. And so, teacher was busy.
That's a rather isolated place, isn't it? Where that
Yeah,
school-
to go from our place either way, well, the one-way circle around the closest road would have been 5-6 miles, and the other way 10 or 12. There's no crossroads.
And not many people nearby.
Well, there was a place about every 100 and, on an average of 120 acres. There wasn't the closest buildings were short half mile.
When you look back and compare it with today's schools where they have many teachers and teachers' helpers, the country schools were pretty isolated, weren't they?
Yeah,
And there was a teacher with all those pupils, no car, no telephone. Did you ever have an accident or where you needed to have help?
well, about 2. Brother Elmer was going to school one day, fall the year, barefoot, and he ran through under a thorn apple tree and run about an inch and a half thorn in his foot.
Ooh.
We were just 20 rods or so from the school, and he managed to hobble on in, and he sat there all day, but he couldn't walk home, so the rest of the course, kids' course, went home and sent Dad around with the car to 5-6 miles, and he took him to Elgin, and that doctor couldn't get the thorn out, so he went to Claremont, and that one managed to get it. And of course he was lame for some little while, and about, I don't know if I suppose in the 8th grade, 7th or 8th, the teacher really wasn't feeling real good. Well, Louise Winger turned out to be any time, and then a couple, 3 weeks from the end of the term, about 11:30, she kind of walked back toward the back of the room, and we're going to have an early, and she's going to say dinner and couldn't make it. She fell down, passed out. Well, that was one of the biggest ones, so I ran up the road to the closest place. That was George Christen's at that time, and she called. Well, Huldah was staying at Gergie Smith's. She called there, and Huldah and the hired man come with a car and picked her up. Of course, they called to school off for that day, and then Huldah finished teaching that term, yeah. That's as close as we come to anything serious, but kind of kept us going, yeah.
Well, it's
About the first year, second year, Mildred Dearest was teaching, and well, one of the boys was always kind of looking for trouble, and it wasn't too long. Talked back to her, I guess, a little too good, and she went back to show him who was boss. And she had a little whip that she won at the fair, wore that out on him, and got along pretty good for a couple of weeks, and he's acting up again. And she started back. About that time he stood up and got prepared. He had a knife in one hand, with the blade in each end. One in the other hand, only one blade. She went back there and she had about a 2-foot piece of tug out of a harness. Started slamming that. And the knife started flying. After that, I think she got along pretty good with him.
I think so.
Well, that could have been bad.
It is interesting while it lasted.
Well, that teacher didn't give up, did she?
No. Well, of course, we had a good steep grade there. We had a lot of fun sliding and such like. And we had our
It's a beautiful spot.
Tell us about it now. It's a pretty spot. We drove up
It's
there one day.
Fix Snyder bought it and fixed it up for a vacation home, and they have it fixed up real good inside and out. Of course, they've had trouble. I think 3 times somebody's gone back there and smashed all the windows, and that didn't make him too happy. But he still fixed it up again.
Mama went to that school.
Did she? It looks like a park now.
Oh, it's pretty.
It's pretty there. It still has some of the school equipment in it, doesn't it? Doesn't it have some of the school equipment in it?
I don't believe
Blackboards
so.
and-
No.
Oh. What's
It
the
had
name?
an organ, but they left it there too long. It was Ethel May Toman's organ, but it too much dampness.
Oh. Tell me, Inez, where did you meet this gentleman?
I went over to help them. What were you doing?
Housekeeper.
Well, I forgot what it was in the fall. Well, I'd known them because they were just a hop and a skip and a jump away from Martin Hanson's. And we'd see him occasionally play ball, remember?
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess I knew her as far back as I can remember, but it took me some time to get interested, even if she got that close. We finally got together, and been that way now for 57 years.
57. When is your anniversary?
15th of September of 41.
Good long while.
Yeah. And she's cooked me one poor meal at that time.
Quite a few meals, hasn't it, Bill? Where were you married, Inez?
We were married at the Presbyterian parsonage at West Union.
You were?
The Methodist ministers were all out at conference.
Oh.
So we just found a minister that wasn't too busy that day.
Well, we bought a license and went looking for a minister, and he took care of the rest of the proceedings.
Did you have attendance?
He called in his wife and a neighbor, and that was it.
Well, you
Very
had witnesses
plain
then.
affair.
Well, that was good. I bet it was. It's lasted.
We got the knot tied.
Sure did. Must have been good and tight.
Wasn't much money spent on decorations or anything, no?
Now, tell us about your dress. Didn't you wear that for your anniversary?
Oh, we had 50th wedding anniversary. I wore it. And I can sure wear it now.
It's a beautiful dress.
It's, even then, I'm thinner now than, I never was very big. No, that, But sure, I could wear the dress now if had anything important to go to.
Well, just every day is important, Inez. Uh, where, when did you, I know you're Illyria members, but when did you join at Illyria, you
Oh,
two?
my dear.
Well, I
Did you-
suppose we moved over there in March of '48, and I suppose we joined up that summer or fall, something like that, yeah.
Where was your church before that? Where were you living before that?
St. Olaf.
St. Olaf.
We started Curious-Bassets, halfway between Elgin and Elcader, and we were there 2 years, and then we were over at St. Olaf, just west of the Norway Church, for 4 years, yeah.
Did you attend functions at the Norway church then?
Well, once in a great while.
See, we had 4 little angels.
Yes, you did.
And I belonged to the Ladies' Aid.
Uh-huh.
I had to go somewhere once in a while with.
Oh, that's a beautiful church.
It is.
So you lived a couple places down that way then, before
Just-
you came to Illyria.
Yeah, 6 years, yeah, 2
Mhm.
places, yeah.
One in Highland and one in near the Norway Church.
Um, did you always farm well?
Yeah, that's the only thing I ever knew.
And Inez, you did housework some.
Oh yes, that's what I liked.
Well, I think you still do.
Pretty short of ambition now,
Oh, I don't know.
but just 6 weeks about, I can take off the cast,
Well, you might tell
and
them.
that's a long time yet.
Would you tell us what started all of this? Why are you wearing those braces?
Oh, I don't know. I broke my leg. The women over at the home, they thought I went too fast. Well, I don't know how fast I was going, but I had to move along pretty fast most of my days.
When did you break that leg?
About the 10th of January, 86, yeah. 89 rather. 98.
Well, by the 10th of January 99, then you expect to have the braces off.
Hope to have it off. And Will told me what it cost. Just that.
Hope you have insurance.
Gracious.
We can't believe things nowadays, the cost. Inez, do you have any real childhood memories you'd like to tell us about? What did you have for family, brothers and sisters?
There were 7 in the family, and there's 2 of us left.
And what was your maiden name?
Chase.
Your parents were?
Now just the youngest boy and myself. He's next to the youngest, and I'm next to the oldest.
That's Ralph.
Yes.
And what were your parents' names?
Elizabeth and Willis Chase.
Why didn't you name your family members? We knew some of them.
Well, to start out, Bernice was the older,
Bernice who?
then myself,
Nichols, Bernice Nichols.
yes, then Lester, Elmer, Floyd, and Ralph, and Rosella.
Rosella recently passed away.
Yes.
So did Bernice. So, do you have any childhood memories? What'd you do?
Beg pardon?
Do you have any childhood memories that were unusual? Mother keep...
Well, we always lived near a schoolhouse. Dad wanted it that way, and that's the way it turned out. There wasn't any long walks between school and home.
Mhm.
Oh, I suppose our life was just washing dishes and a few things.
Gardening?
You didn't go to school with Jesse Probert, did you? Jesse,
Huh?
you didn't go to school with Jesse Midbury, did you?
Indeed I did.
Oh,
We always said she was the best teacher we ever had.
Jessie Midbury.
Yes. I don't know why. I was a little duffer back then, and that was most of my grade school, you see. She was teaching. Oh, yes. We liked her. And so, we just have to brag about that, that's all. And I don't know. But you know, life was pretty quiet back in those days.
Everyone was busy.
And you know, I forgot when they got a car, but you know, with horse and buggies, we didn't go too far with the team and horses. And so, it was a quiet life.
Well, can you tell us about what you did for entertainment with your
Well,
family?
I can remember the first car. I would have been 3 years old then, 1915. There was 3 new Fords in this neighborhood that year, the first cars in the neighborhood. And I suppose by about 18 or 20 everybody had a car. And well, of course we farmed with horses, and I think we got our first second-hand tractor about in 36, a 1020 McCormick, and we kept building up from there.
Now,
Let's see. I guess you mentioned I should tell that telephone story, so maybe I better get that in before we forget it. Anyhow, the first telephones were in that neighborhood about 1905, and of course everybody was Swiss, and this one fellow always spoke English at the telephone, and finally somebody asked him why he did that. And, well, he said, that thing won't speak Swiss, will it? But it did.
it did speak Swiss if it had to.
And another one older lady in the neighborhood, of course, didn't get around much and wanted all the news, so whenever the phone rang, she'd listen, and sometimes it lasted a little too long, and she'd holler, Mary, bring me a chair.
Oh, the party lines were great, weren't they?
But everybody had their own rings. Ours was too short and too long. I know what all the rest of them were. Central was 3 shorts. And,
How many were on the line, do you know?
oh, about 8, possibly 8, maybe 10. If I took plenty of time, I could figure it out.
All right, what did they do if there was an emergency? If there was an emergency, what did they do in the telephones?
Well, ring a long ring, and when everybody come listening, why, it got pretty faint, and then they'd pass the word along. And of course, you're too far from town to call a fire truck, even if there had been one. The first fire truck was in 1920, and it had taken a half hour to get out as far as we were from the time they started. So there were fires around, but not any real serious ones in my time. Somebody lose a shed or something like that, but not any that I can name offhand. I think I was only to one fire in the neighborhood. One stormy night, the lightning hit its machine shed, and lost his machinery and a couple of cars.
What about storms? Did you ever have any damaging storms? Did you have any damaging storms down in your country? Or didn't that?
No, we'd have a tree or something about as close as it ever come, and never any buildings right there. Well, one neighbor, Chris Gregerson, had a barn burned down with lightning, and then built a new one. A couple of years later, why, it hit it again. It didn't set it on fire, but knocked one corner out of it completely. Just slivered it. That's as close. Of course, we had at least one good horse killed by lightning.
How many horses did your family keep?
About that.
How many horses?
How many horses did your family keep?
Oh, as a rule, about at least 4, maybe 6 work horses and 2, 3, 4 colts being raised. Had 1 or 2 colts every year, and by the time there were 3, we'd start either working them or selling them. We never had 6 good sound horses at the same time till the last few years.
Did you use, after you went through school, did you go to high school? Did you
No.
pretty much work in the family farm then? Did you pretty much work in the family farm?
Yeah, I worked out for wages for 2 years. Well, yeah, a year and a half at the one place, and then,
And what did you get?
well, I got $25 a month, or $1 a day. 25 a month was very top wages at that time.
That's what I
yeah.
wondered.
Of course, you got board and room. They were that year and a half, 25 a month was the easiest work I ever had.
No?
3 old maids, an old bachelor uncle, and no long hours or any push any time.
That's going to Christian Brothers? That is it, the Christian Brothers?
Oh, Pat, stop. Black Pat Miney.
Pat Monahan, yeah, yeah.
Black Pat.
I
not
think
Red
the kind
Pat,
of the old maiden ladies liked Will.
That's up on 56.
Yeah.
Did the mail always get through? Did the mail always get delivered?
The mail.
The
Mail.
Well, there's about 5 of us in the neighborhood. Got a neighbor together and mail together, and whoever went to town brought the mail for all of them, and then we'd go and collect it there. And no, the mail route never come in that neighborhood till after the war sometime, about 54, 5, something
It
like
didn't?
that, yeah.
You had to get it from town?
And pay box rent besides.
Oh,
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Well, one of the nights I remember getting the mail was over at the Christen Brothers. About as dark a night as I ever saw. It wasn't quite raining. Then, well, that road made a half circle between the 2 places, and there was timber on the right, and the other side was open. And all I had to go by was I could see the difference in the light between the trees and the sky, and my feet on the road, so I didn't have any trouble finding my way, but got about halfway, and all of a sudden a dog let out a few yelps just across the fence somewhere. Whose dog it was or anything I never did hear to find out.
Lillian told a story. She was the last one to go to school across the fields. And there's a lot of big rocks, really big rocks on the side hill. And one morning she was walking, and there was a whole bunch of snakes everywhere. Well, she didn't take her long to get through there. But you see, the snakes were coming out of the rocks. It was warming up.
In the spring. Yeah.
So she didn't go that way for a while.
That's your sister.
Yeah.
Inez, you were telling a story about Bill's sister Elizabeth. Would you like to tell that, about her traveling?
Well, she'd been in Switzerland many times. 10 times anyway. She'd go over on vacation. And she was in a bus one day. And they came upon a farmer. He had one horse and a load of hay. But 2 women behind were pushing. And he was holding the line, so of course the poor animal couldn't get away. And Elizabeth, it made her so angry. She leaned out, and if she didn't give him a blessing in Swiss, I'll tell you. But she'd taught Swiss all of her life. Will kind of slipped away with that. But Elizabeth, oh, she was still hopping mad.
Well, Elizabeth did travel a lot. Now, we're talking about Elizabeth Christen, and a lot of
Yes.
people knew her. But she lived in Chicago. She lived in Chicago then?
Yeah.
What did she do there?
Well, to start with, she was doing housework, and then she took some night schooling and got a job doing bookwork for a railroad. And she swore that when she quit, they had to get 3 people to replace her. But she could look at a column of figures and tell you how much it amounted to.
Yeah, they probably had to.
She was
Things
smart.
like that, of course, would help, you know.
But she traveled quite extensively then too,
Yeah.
didn't she?
And
Oh,
then she
my.
did.
I think in
Clerk.
most of the states.
She clerked at a baker then for several years after she retired from the railroad, yeah. She
But
was always pretty independent, and she, whatever come along, she could handle, yeah.
Well, she had a nice house in Elgin. That's the one we live in.
Yeah, well, she bought it secondhand, of course, too, but
Sure. It's a nice place.
and she traveled a lot.
Where did the term Dutch bottom come from?
well, I guess everybody in there was Swiss, and instead of Swiss, it was Dutch. Suppose that's somebody speaking English could come up with that name. But I've said several times, I went to town when I was a kid, why, the only time you heard English was when the Swiss was talking to a Norwegian.
They didn't talk Norwegian together.
No, they could. One could talk English, and one could talk Swiss, and one could talk Norwegian, but they could both speak English, so that's what they used.
Did you go to town often?
Well, if we real often is once a month, and the first 10, 12 years after that we usually went on Saturday or Saturday night, depending on the time of year and the weather and all that, yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the big changes you've seen in the town?
Well, I first started going to town on Saturday night, why, if we're a little early, why, Mike, I can't quite say his name, Mike was going up and down the street with a sprinkler wagon to hold down the dust, and after a bit they put on a little heavier gravel, and finally the blacktop. And of course, at that time I think we had 6 grocery stores in town, and of course no saloons then during the Prohibition. There's always some available if you wanted it. And everybody made their own, so back before, well, Iowa had prohibition, had a donation, and every once in a while somebody would go over to Prairie du Chien, get a load of beer, and it went around.
If they made their own, what did they make it of?
Well, either homebrew was water and yeast and I think a little sugar, and wine you can make out of
Grapes, berries?
grapes or apple cider, or
Tomatoes.
dandelions or prunes, anything that had a
Whatever.
little
Whatever's
flavor
available.
to it.
Anything that would work.
Grandma made it out of
Wild
tomatoes.
cherries,
She did.
Yes, see,
wild
if
cherries
it'd work.
made lots of good wine. And one neighbor up the hill here, I guess, had a batch, and this one expert taster come along one day, and Alfred brought out a glass of wine and handed it to Alf Sloop, and Alf took a sip and held the glass up and looked at it a while, and said, "It's awful smell." No, this Alf, the fellow that delivered it, said, "This is 3-year-old cherry wine." And Alf Sloop was tasting, looked at it a while and held up the glass, and he says, "An awful small glass for his age."
Like to have a bigger one.
Must have been good. Inez, you said your mother made it out of tomatoes.
Grandma,
Did you ever smell of it?
I don't know. And she tried it.
Rotten tomatoes is about the awfulest smelling thing there is.
I
No, they
don't
wouldn't-
know
they
much
wouldn't
about
spoil.
her. But
No,
maybe I should tell this. Will's folks, when he was just a little fella, somebody gave him a drink, and he was dreadfully sick. And a smell of that, in this day and age, turns him off awful quick.
Well,
But he was real small then. And
Well-
so somebody didn't know any better.
think of all the money you saved.
well, I don't remember of it, I don't believe.
Well, you told about that.
When Prohibition come in, they started making their own home brew. The wine they'd always made, but the home brew they hadn't, the beer. But anyhow, they were bottling it by guess, and if they got it a little too soon or a little too late, why, they built up too much pressure and blew up the bottles. And after a while, they got some testers and they could do it at the right time, yeah.
Didn't take much to blow up the jars. I
Oh,
can.
yes,
Tom packed the sauerkraut too tight one time, and Paul came in and then in the evening, and bang bang, the sauerkraut was exploding.
Yeah,
You had, Margaret,
What?
get Bill to say something about early conservation. He's quite conservation.
Oh, yes, you were some of the earliest well, you were quite a conservationist. How do you want to tell us something about the changes in agriculture?
well, our neighborhood was pretty slow getting started. I think I helped lay out our own, the first contours in Marion Township, at least north of the river, south of the river. And well, the first line we laid out is 1 3/4 miles long. And so we laid out the rest of the field accordingly, and from there on, I guess we stayed on the contour pretty much altogether, but that neighborhood was pretty slow coming around, but they finally did. And of course the rotation was altogether different originally. Why, they kept in corn as long as it raised corn, and then they'd try something else for a while. And when I first remember, why, the good farmers had 2 years of corn and 2 of oats, and sowed oats and clover and timothy, and about 1 year and 3 the clover would kill out, so all we had is timothy, and it filled the barn, but it wasn't very good feed. But, well, it was good horse feed, but the cows didn't do good on it.
You had some of the first alfalfa too, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, we had sowed some, a couple acres, 3, something like that, and it come up half a stand or something like that. So then we decided to spread some lime, and well, we had the rocks right close there. And, well, it's just, they happened to be on the Christen Brothers land, but we had access to them, and they wanted some at the same time, so we got busy and started picking up loose rock and blasting some of the big rock down, and loaded them on a wagon and hauled them on a pile, and 2 piles, and one for them and one for us. And got Tom Olson over from Gundner to grind them, and well, the rock had to be broke up enough to go through an 8-inch square hole. So we picked up the rocks again and put them on the table of the mill and run them through, run them out on the pile. So then we shoveled the lime into the wagon and got out in the field and shoveled it into the spreader, and we had the lime on the field. I think we had 25 ton the first time. Then after that, why, they started setting up lime mills and delivering lime. And the first few years they just dumped it, we had to shovel it into a wagon and spread it again. But after a while they got to where they spread it too.
Albert Deegover had that marl there, didn't he? Albert Deegover had that marl, didn't he?
Yeah. I don't know just how much came out of there, but I guess Albert wouldn't make it very handy for anybody to dig out, so there wasn't as much taken as should have been. Yeah. No, originally the only reason they had for spreading lime was to spread alfalfa, and then they found out that it helped for other crops too. And I suppose it ran into 50s or something like that before all the ground was limed. It's about in the middle 30s, I think, when we ground that first batch. Yeah.
You moved up in Elyria Township. When you moved up in Elyria Township, didn't you pioneer some new methods there too?
No, Elyria was pretty well along by that time. We weren't, well, our place hadn't been touched or contoured any. I guess I did the first wheel track planting of corn, just plowed it and planted it. Set the tractor wheels so that the planter ran in the same track, and planted it that way. There was quite a bit of it done, but then when they got to 4 and 6 row planters, why, it couldn't be worked out. A 2 row planter, you could get the wheels in enough to use it.
Wheel track planter.
Oh. That was what we did on the prairie.
No.
On the prairie, they checked it in.
No,
That's different than we did on the prairie.
on the prairie, they checked it in, she said. They checked it in on the
They-
prairie.
Testing the,
They checked it in on the prairie with a wire.
oh yeah, well, yeah, that was quite a trick too, that landing with a wire, why some could get a perfect cross throw and some were halfway off. And on rough ground, it'd be a lot harder yet than it was on flat ground. You needed a straight edge, straight fence somewhere to get started, and a lot of fields you had trouble finding a straight fence. So then you'd have to adjust your wire every time you restaked it, because the fence would taper one way or the other. I think I planted with wire once. That is, I planted for a neighbor after we were over on our own, and I'd been on the contour for some years then, yeah. But it is pretty hard to convince some people that you couldn't raise corn if you couldn't work it both ways. Yeah.
What about electricity? Where did you first farm where you had electricity?
Well, Dad got a Swan Light plant in 1920. Grimm and Shippach started selling them. They were running the implement shop in town, and they had a special deal on if they could sell a full carload of equipment, and they did. And how much they got for it, I don't know, but they did the wiring and everything, and we well, as I said, we put that up in 1920, and we run it till 1940. 40 we got our REA, and at that time everybody was trying to keep their lights down enough so they'd stay under the minimum call, but it didn't take long. They went over it.
When you had your own, how much lighting did you do?
How much?
Could you use more lights with REA then?
Oh yes, and of course a lot more power.
Yeah.
A quarter horse motor's about, if you had your engine running, why, you could run a half horse. With the washing machine running, why, you wanted the engine running too, even with a quarter horse motor. It'd run an hour or two, but without, but once you got your batteries down, then you had trouble starting your plant again, and so of course there was several sizes of batteries that you could get too. I know, I think the first set of batteries ran us about 12 years or maybe 14, and the second set was still running when we got the high juice, and the engine was too, and we sold it as such a combination. I don't know what we got for it or anything anymore, but that fellow didn't get the high line for 2-3 years after, and he run it that long. Well, Fred Shantz got it from us, you know.
Where were you living when you got REC?
We were still at the home, yeah.
That changed things a lot? Did that change things a lot then?
Yeah, we could use more power. Well, we had used the engine to pump water always, or windmill. Of course, we were where the wind couldn't hit us much. It couldn't depend on the windmill, so we got an engine, and well, Dad had one from years before, and that played out. We got one with a pump and jack, engine and jack in one unit, And we run that, I think 14 years. I kept it going till about 3 weeks before we got juice. And it absolutely couldn't be run anymore, so I hooked the tractor up to the flywheel and pumped water that way. So then we took the head off of the engine and set the motor up there and run that to run the pump for a year or two till we got a complete outfit. Yeah.
Ines, do you remember the Depression?
Oh, my sakes, yes.
I know Bill probably does.
Oh, yeah. We didn't go dashing around very much.
Did you have a lot of garden?
Oh, yes, yes. I've always liked that. Yes. But the Depression, people stayed home pretty close, if I remember correctly. But over the garden, that's a good topic, Will.
Well, I was working for the minings at that time when it got to the bottom in the fall of 32. The hogs got down to 2.5 cents. In fact, I got 2.5 by taking them to Marquette. That was a nickel higher than they were paying locally. He had his own truck. He had 2,700 pounds, and he come home with $87.
So there wasn't very much money circulating.
No, but you had your gardens and you had your...
Yes,
The farmers
indeed.
probably fared pretty good.
Our own meat and milk and
No, there was, you had your berries and everything imaginable in the garden. That's what I like.
Tell us about the butchering. What did you eat?
well, as a rule, we'd wait till about New Year's till it got good and cold, and butcher beef and a couple of hogs, and cut them up, make a couple of 300 pounds of borscht, and grind up the lard and cook it out, and smoke the ham and bacon and the wurst and whatever else.
You didn't have to worry about people coming in unexpectedly. You could just run down into the basement and get your dinner.
The canned hamburger and beef and whatever.
What was worst?
Burst.
Bologna,
Wurst.
homemade sausage.
Did you stuff it?
Yeah. Yeah, we had, the Christen brothers had a stuffer and a grinder and hook it up to a motor or light plant or pump engine and grind our meat, and Wally was the official mixer, and he'd mix it up and then we'd stuff it.
You had natural casings.
Well, as a rule, we cleaned our own. Sometimes they had to buy some.
How'd you clean them?
You'll have to ask Mom.
Well, the men that use a lot of water, wash them out. Turn them inside out and start in with a blunt knife, scraping the inner casing off, and that's all. It was a slow process.
I think
But
so.
it didn't cost anything but
No.
time.
Well, they'd thread the end of that intestine onto a funnel and pour the water in the funnel. They got to an end or a break or whatever, and then start over again.
Sounds like a tedious job.
Oh,
It was.
slow
By the
process.
time we got the meat ready to stuff, or the women had the casings ready, and we'd keep on going. It's a pretty big day's work. Usually Bert Toman was one of the main butchers, and Butch Christen, and they'd get started early and they'd have the beef hung up and skinned. By the time the rest of the chores are done, and Then we'd start on the hogs and dip them in the barrel of hot water and scald them.
Scrape that. Huh?
Switch ends on them and scald the other end and scrape them. And if it was a pretty big hog, well, we didn't always have enough room to maybe be a spot in the middle that doesn't get scalded.
Then what did you do?
Either pour hot water on it or take a gunny sack and dip it in the gunny hot water and then slash it on, or else just scrape it off. A scalded hog was really a pretty critter, yeah.
Yeah, that,
Just smooth and polished as anything you want to find, yeah.
and it's kind of fun to chew out those rinds.
Yeah.
Ines, why don't you tell us about rendering lard? Everyone cooked with lard.
Oh, I enjoyed that. The smaller you cut the pieces up, the quicker it melted. But then they had the cider, and the lard press. That took a pretty good, strong arm to
You
crush
press
those
Press
cracklings.
the cracklings, get it all out.
And some ladies made cookies with them, the
Cracklings.
cracklings. And chickens liked them, but you had to be pretty careful. You could overdo it.
Oh,
And then the hens wouldn't lay for some time if they
Oh.
made pigs of themselves.
well, didn't they use them for homemade soap?
Oh, yes, yes. Of
And
course,
rancid lard?
that followed right along. Oh, yes. And what else was old fashioned then, I wonder?
No, if the lard got strong and rancid, then
Oh,
my
yeah.
mother always made soap out of it.
Yes. So it didn't go to waste. No.
Made head cheese and what all else, yeah.
Did you know how many years did I
Liverwurst.
keep a diary? And Glenn has it recorded on something, one of these newfangled things.
How many
and
years?
Lewis brought the diaries home, and he had this man that lives in David's,
Bill Ogle.
huh?
Bill Ogle,
yeah.
yeah.
And he's typed it all, but they said there was 2 years missing. I couldn't imagine why. Glenn has them.
Oh, then how many years diaries do you have?
Well, I started in at 16, and after I was out of commission, then I didn't write in my diaries much.
You mean this year?
Yes,
Oh,
but since I've been home, I've started up and I've just been putting down the important things. I didn't write every day.
that's quite a treasure. I'm glad you boys are preserving them.
I don't know who wants them and who's going to take care of them, but anyway, that's...
Put those in the Smithsonian in Washington.
Huh?
They put those in the Smithsonian in Washington.
Oh, no.
Well, if they're copied, then they can share them. They can make more
Yes.
copies.
Yes, Lewis had a great big container of them, and there were the 2 years. I knew I hadn't given them to anyone, and Lewis says, don't you go into that cedar chest unless somebody's helping you. Well, I didn't get that done, but Glenn broke down and said he had the 2
Oh.
years.
Well,
So they're safe, and maybe he's printing them for all I know.
they'll join the rest of them
Well,
soon
he
then.
copied about 4 years of it, and so he's got 60 years to go on yet.
But you say that most of them are typed off now?
No, I don't think so. I know how much he's done since then. This was
Working on it.
Mhm.
early last spring when we brought those 4, and how far along he is now, I don't know.
I see. Well,
He'll be here
eventually.
tomorrow. We might think to ask him. He might bring some along or something, yeah.
I don't know what. Oh, Glenn has written 2 books, but I don't think he sold either one.
What were they about?
I don't know.
Westerns,
Westerns.
his own concoction.
Well, I bet they're good.
He should be.
He was
I've
quite a
heard
reader,
worse.
wasn't he, Glenn? Glenn was quite a reader, wasn't he?
Oh,
Well, yeah,
heavens,
quite a
yes.
student, yeah.
Did you have all 4 boys when you moved up to Elyria?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Louis was 13 months old.
Okay.
Yeah, Louis, David and Paul were born over in Kerry, Espacets, and Paul and David and Glenn and Louis over at St. Olaf, yeah.
I see.
But Louis got homesick after he moved up here. But he's just a little different disposition maybe than the others.
Well, he knew he wasn't home. It was
Well, we
different.
had one interesting half a day. We're getting to move, ready to move over to St. Olaf. And Charlie Haters are moving in the house there again. We bought them out in the first place. And we were getting everything settled up. They were there. Mom was just getting ready to put dinner on the table, had it on the table. And she had a couple of quarts of, what were they?
Tomatoes.
Tomatoes, and she had cooked them in the oven. She opened the oven door and pulled the 2 jars out on the oven door. And the cold air hit them. They blew up. Well,
We had a wooden ceiling.
What a mess.
Carrie Espacet was sitting over to one side, and Louis is in her arms.
No, David.
No, Louis.
Louis?
No, not
no.
Louis, it's Paul, yeah. Paul was about a couple of months old, and it threw enough over there to scald his face a little bit, and Carrie's arm, and she was holding him over here, and the arm on this side, and the stove over here, and David is just coming through the door from where Charlie and I were over in the living room, and it hit a spot on his forehead about the size of a finger. And of course, everything on the table was full of glass. The only thing she could salvage was the sugar, because she cooked that and poured it off and strained it, and so she had to make another meal. But
And Brother Rao, no, it was Elmer, said, I suppose it was some new dish she was fixing.
Tomatoes.
so
And it sure was a new dish I was fixing.
You had,
Only time I ever did it, too.
you had them in the oven.
Yes.
Well, what were you doing with them?
just
Canning them?
just
Processing
canning
them.
I say.
She just that much, and she was going to get all the paraphernalia ready, and
It was worth a try.
yeah,
But it's been done, but I didn't follow that course again.
Now, you both had a Swiss heritage. Do you have any special customs or foods that are Swiss
well,
that you follow?
Mother used to make a few, but I couldn't tell you any. One we used to like real good. Whenever we got a fresh cow, she'd use that milk and make some pudding, and we always thought that was something wonderful, but I don't know if she's the only one I ever knew of that made it, and I don't know if anybody would have a recipe for it. I imagine it's her own, yeah. But, we had different things like that, but just what they'd be, I don't know. Mother died when I was 6, so I don't have much idea what.
No.
Now 7, I guess I was, just 7, yeah.
You don't make Swiss foods or anything now,
No.
dishes.
But the noodles over in that old neighborhood, noodles, I think every place they thrashed, they had noodles. And dressing. That was 2 things.
Sounds good.
Well, I don't know, I suppose about 10 or so at the time, thrashing over their neighbors and she's out at Davenport and had gone on to school, and she had raw tomatoes for dinner, and some of the boys were a little skeptical about eating them. They didn't. They all survived. All the tomatoes they never had was cooked.
Didn't think they should eat raw tomatoes.
I'd
Oh.
forgotten about the explosion.
Did you have any family that, either one of you that served in the military? Well, did you have any family? Your boys served in the military, but did you have any previous?
And he went,
In the military?
well, yeah, Glenn and Paul and David were in, yeah.
They took,
They,
it wasn't any,
they all volunteered, so they got to pick out what they wanted, but
Yeah.
they weren't in during any of the fighting, no. Glenn was over in Thailand. I guess they were flying from there into a neighboring country. He never was up on any of the missions, but one of their that he was working with, I believe it was just one man in the plane, and he got hit over there, or the machine did, knocked out his air conditioner, but he managed to come back, and he lost 20 pounds on that flight.
No. Lost how much?
He was pretty warm.
I think so.
no.
And, well, he brought us each a dressing gown that he had made over there, yeah. Maybe even show it to you after we get done, yeah.
And that was Glenn,
Yeah.
and David served in Korea.
Paul was in the Air Force too, and he was never up in a plane.
Oh, he's
He
been
spent all
now.
his time in some down Texas, but most of it out at Omaha.
Oh.
And David, there was just once, he said, was he able to go to the shop and pick out what he wanted. They had spotted a ship way out of sight there in Korea, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so David made up a gun, and he wrote us a letter. If that wasn't the funniest letter, a couple of days later he told why. I suppose he was so nervous he couldn't write straight.
Oh.
But when they fired this gun, they got the boat.
They had him, whatever it was, they had him
It had
fix it
no
up
business.
special, whatever, and that's what he went in for in the first place, was so he could learn to work and
Gun repair.
repair guns, yeah.
He taught.
He spent a year in Thailand, I think, about, yeah.
Well, you had a grandson is he still in service?
Oh,
His
yes.
boy?
No, he's been out for a year now.
He's been processing these boys that have been going over to that other country.
Oh,
Well, some, just the last week or so, yeah.
and you
He's
have,
still in the reserve, but he's putting in some time right now, I believe, yeah.
oh, that's probably why he's doing now.
Transporting and
I'll have to.
lining up
Mhm.
for these that are going across, yeah.
Now, and Paul had 3 boys, right? Paul has 3 boys.
Yeah.
So you have 4 grandchildren?
Yeah.
None of those boys are in service then?
No, well, two of them wouldn't qualify, and of course the youngest one is
He's young.
he's normal and all that, but no draft, and he didn't figure on volunteering, so
Do they still have to sign up for the draft?
no.
They don't?
I believe they do.
I don't know.
They'll
I
I
register.
think they have to
What?
sign their name, but they aren't drafting any
Yeah,
now.
well, I don't know.
They have to register.
Are
They
they?
have to register.
Yeah, they have to
Okay,
register,
I
yeah.
didn't know if Lance
Yeah.
had or not.
The oldest
Yeah.
boy,
Yeah, they've had physical problems, the boys have.
he's,
Mhm.
And the other one is overweight, yeah.
Yeah.
computer is the older boy.
Well, do you have any more stories to tell? Either one of you?
Well, get us primed just right, we might have some.
Are there any important people, special people that influenced your life? You will.
I can't name any in particular.
I can. Inez influenced yours and you influenced Inez's. That's it, isn't it?
Well, she's been there for whenever I wanted
I
her,
think
the
you better
last
quit,
57
Mary.
years,
Get
so.
them down. Damn everything.
Well, maybe we've talked enough. We've probably
When I say,
tired you
Tom,
out. And
Margaret said no, but would you like some ice cream and
Don't
cake?
worry about that.
we're still on the picture.
Let's turn this off.
Well, let me tell.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we've interviewed you, probably filled the tape. So, thank you, and it's been a nice visit, and I hope it turns out to be a good picture.
Yeah, well,
Well,
don't charge too much, we might see it at the time you show it.
maybe I'll
I
look
hope you
like I
can.
didn't sleep last night.
There's-
Done?
Yeah,